The Clear Signal with Steve Visscher.
Damian Coory, it's great to meet you. Thanks for joining us.
You too, Steve. Thanks for inviting me. Good to be here.
Yeah, Damian, you've been in the media and in the communications business for a long time, your whole career, in fact. And I thought we might have a look at some principles of that in this interview. As it pertains to the recent federal election here in Australia, I know the analysis of that has kind of been done to death, but it kind of fascinates me. The result of that election, I guess, was not unexpected, but I think the magnitude of it was something that nobody expected. And I think, as it pertains at least to the conservative side of politics here in Australia, that really came down to a big failure in communications.
Enormous. I mean, it was truly tragic. Also, I would have to say, a lot of 101 sort of errors made. Very disappointing low level of professionalism in the Liberal National Party coalition on the communications front. I don't know how they can keep going with the same people, but they do. There really does have to be a rethink. Doesn't bring me any joy to say that. I don't like criticizing people, but I'd rather see that they were successful. I'd rather be looking back and saying what a wonderful, job they did. But
Yeah.
no, it was pretty appalling. And when you're up against a machine as well-oiled as the Australian Labor Party and their connections that they have around the world with different sort of senior campaign outfits in the UK and the US, I mean, you really, it's like, honestly, watching Muhammad Ali go into a boxing ring with a gnat. I mean, it's just horrifying.
I mean, you kind of have to admire the way they operate in the ALP these days. I saw them described just after the election by one commentator as a war machine, and I think that's actually a very, very accurate way of describing the way they operate. They know how to leverage media. They know how to take a position. They know how to pick apart their opposition's position on really anything. I think the work from home thing, I was actually reminded of the work from home debacle this morning. There was an interview on local radio here in Melbourne where they were rehashing that with a Liberal Party guy, and it's, things like that make it easy for a well-oiled machine like the Labor media machine to be able to pull those sort of arguments apart and reframe the argument. The Liberals just don't seem to be able to learn this lesson.
No, and they've lost so many elections. I mean, like it's a dozen, I think, elections apart from the last Queensland state election was the only one they won. They should have won the one before that. They only sort of won this one because the government was just so bad that people couldn't come back for another run. Look, I don't know what the answer is anymore. I've kind of lost hope in a sense. There were a lot of things wrong with the campaign, but there's a lot of things fundamentally wrong with the way that the party operates and the coalition operates. And I think we're sort of starting to see that come out now. The party has lost the trust of the base. You can't survive as a political party in this day and age without a strong base. And the Liberal Party isn't doing anything to nurture its base. In fact, what I think we are seeing is a Liberal Party that's a kind of club for a closed shop, more or less, or being operated as such by the small group of people in it who have power now, and they don't want to give that power up. So they're actually rejecting. I know of a lot of people being rejected membership at a time when memberships are absolutely rock bottom. I mean, from the numbers I'm hearing, if they're half true, the Liberal Party is in crisis, but no one inside the party is acting as if it's in crisis, because that's, I think, the only explanation for that is that that's kind of what they want. They want to just have a small group of elites controlling the party and controlling everything. So if that's the reality, in Queensland, they're one party. In the rest of the country, of course, they're two separate parties, the Liberal and National parties. But the same phenomenon seems to be occurring in both parties. So we've got that happening. Then in the minor right-wing parties that have picked up the 11.7% that the Liberal National Coalition has shed from the right flank, the minor parties that have scooped that up all, of course, have their own small clubs and control issues as well. So I don't know what the answer is, apart from maybe a Menzies Albury type meeting where he pulls everyone gets together and tries to fix the thing, but nobody seems to want to start that conversation or have that conversation because everybody wants to protect their own little patch, and there's too many people who think that they're going to be the individual saviors. And
It's almost as if they're comfortable being in opposition and they can take those nice salaries and just sit there and snipe away on the sidelines. But that's not leadership, is it? And what I think Dutton to me was disappointing because he didn't take a leadership position. If we go back to that work from home issue, that when they backflipped on that one, that was the day, in my opinion, they lost the election because straight away that just showed that they didn't really believe the sorts of things they sort of throwing these things out as talking points. It almost seems and hoping it resonates, but a little bit of negative press and they backed right off. Well, that's not leadership. We need someone at the helm of that party to be able to articulate a position. And we're going to talk a little bit later in this interview about some people who are very, very effective at that. But we need someone in this country who can take a position, basically pick their hill and die on it. But there just doesn't seem to be anyone. I actually thought Dutton might have been that guy, but it turns out that he wasn't.
Well, he was, and then something happened. So we had a situation where we had Dutton on, I think, a -19 net approval rating. I mean, that sounds bad, but a net approval rating is approvals minus disapprovals. And, -19 is not great, but it's not the end of the world. Albanese at that time was on a -20. And then at the beginning of this year, it all shifted. And we saw Albanese improve to a I think, -6. And we saw Dutton plummet to a -42 or 43. So that says something. That says that there was a switch. There was a point at which things flipped. And I think the point at which things flipped was really at the point at which he started to try to be all things to all people. And when you are all things to all people or attempting to be all things to all people, you are nothing to nobody. And the Liberal Party continue. I mean, I've been involved in chat groups in inner city electorates. I've been involved listening to groups of conservatives from inside and outside the party, former Liberal Party people. I've had people on my show who've spoken and analysed things to death. And I've really just come to the conclusion that we've got two separate groups here. And it's not John Howard's Broad Church anymore.
No.
It's two very distinct groups that are actually perhaps incompatible. And therefore, anybody who's trying to appease both those groups and both of the electoral audiences that those groups represent is doomed to failure because the positions and values are actually contradictory.
Yeah, they need to understand. They need to really have a think about what it is they stand for. One of the things I thought was interesting when Susan Lee, who has now been installed as the leader of the Liberal Party, in her first speech, she came out and said that she wants to meet Australians where they are. Now, what does that actually mean? Does that mean that she wants to sort of look at what the Labor people are doing and say, maybe we should do a little bit more of that? I think that would be a huge mistake.
Well, this reflects one side of the equation, right? And it's the side of the equation that upon which the moderates sit and the inner city seats need to be they believe they need to win on. These sorts of ideas of being very progressive and very modern. The word that she used over and over and over in her initial speech was modern. We have to meet Australians where they are. We have to modernize, modern, which of course is code for progressivism.
Yeah, 100%.
So, yeah. So that basically, it's not a conciliatory opening the door type of message. This is the whole problem. On the one hand, that's the right approach because you can't be all things to all people, as I just said. So you do need to sort of say, okay, we're going to be the moderate Liberal Party. We're going to be this party for inner city people. But of course, there's an entire other group in the party who are probably more conservative leaning socially, who don't share the values of the inner city university educated females typically are different to males. If we look at the American research and data into that, and I think we have that in Australia as well, that in America it's really polarized between college educated females and everybody else. But the college educated females control the culture. They control all of the institutions of culture and conversation and dialogue and discourse. So, HR, PR, inside corporations, they control a lot of the bureaucracy is very much controlled by college-educated women demographic these days. A lot of education, is controlled by them, and a lot of media is controlled by them. So that group is incredibly powerful, and of course they're so clever because they continue to hang on to the idea that they're not powerful, that they're an oppressed group, but they're very, very strong and very powerful. And then there's everybody else. And Susan Lee is right. If the Liberal Party wants to win those inner city seats, it has to be the modern, moderate Liberal Party. My position, my argument is, what do you do with everybody else? By the way, that Liberal Party that's targeting that market will probably shrink because the Labor Party will move over and eventually just swallow it up, because it is the traditional sort of probably more traditional Labor area of the segment of the market. Now, people say to me, "Oh, but the inner city seats, that were traditionally blue ribbon Liberal, they were the great stones and jewels in our crown of the inner cities." Well, those seats seem to have gone teal or green in Brisbane, at least at the last election, and they didn't come back. So we had 3 green seats in Brisbane after the last election because we didn't have any teals running, and then in Sydney and Melbourne you had the teals all in the inner city. So the same phenomenon was occurring. 2 of those green seats were lost by the Green. 2 of those 3 green seats in Brisbane were lost, but they were lost to Labor. They weren't lost to the Liberal Party. So I'm not sure how they're ever going to come back. And the better strategy might be for the non-Susan Lee Liberal Party, so the group that's looking for a home right now, for them to look at the outer suburbs, the working class conservatives. We might have once called them the Howard Battlers, but I think it's a little bit more nuanced than that now. It's much bigger now. And the rural and regional vote. And if you had a Conservative Party that really put its ear to the ground, ignored everything that comes through the mainstream media filters that are controlled by that other group, and really listen to the average Australian, the concerns of the real Australians in that demographic, then I think you could build a really powerful political force. You could pull back a lot of that 11.7% that's bled out to the minor parties, because everybody's getting really frustrated with the minor parties, their lack of professionalism, their lack of organization, their lack of depth of structure. I mean, why is One Nation only now looking at branches? It's a business, that party, and it's never sought to grow and develop at the, unfortunately. So it's sort of been stagnated and held back by that, I think, to a certain extent. It's also got brand heritage issues, of course, that concern people. But yeah, I mean, there's a great opportunity there for a Nigel Farage type movement in Australia, some kind of reform type movement, and
Farage
is the new party.
Farage is the poster boy for this at the moment. If I follow UK politics quite closely, if we were to hold an election now, if they were to hold an election right now, based on the polls in the UK, Reform UK, which only has half a dozen seats in their parliament at the moment, would probably win in a landslide. Now, that's been a very long game for Nigel Farage. He's been playing this game for 25, 30 years, but he is a man who takes a leadership position. He doesn't care. He doesn't seem to care what people throw at him. They can throw the racist or the far right or all the usual stuff that gets thrown that seems to bother a lot of conservative politicians and make them back off. It doesn't with him. He gets out there, he has a consistent message, and he sticks at it, and it's starting to resonate. And I guess one of the things I wanted to talk to you about today is is this a point in history, do you think, in political history here in Australia, where now's the time for a movement like Reform UK to start? It's not going to take over overnight. I don't know. As you say, I don't know that One Nation is the answer. It doesn't resonate well, it seems to me, outside of Queensland. If you come down here in Victoria, where I'm based, it's political poison to talk about that party down here. The Libertarian Party, I have a lot of sympathy for their cause. There's a couple of state libertarian people like David Limbrick, for example, who are the courageous politicians, really. Those are the sort of leaders that we need, people that will just stick to their policy position, and we don't really care what you think. You can like us or you can not like us, but here we are, rather than saying, oh, well, you don't like us, we better change our policy and go a little bit more left. People, that's not leadership, and people can see that.
No, that's right, Steve, and that's why Dutton lost. Really, again, trying to be all things to all people means that you have no spine, no backbone. It's ScoMo 2.0, and it's the Susan Ley. We've got to listen to the people, so which is code for we're going to lead. We're not going to lead. We're going to follow. So we're going to read the research. Okay. You're going to read the research, right? Okay. So then, who's setting the agenda? Right? Because the research doesn't pop out of nowhere. People's ideas and concepts and beliefs and thoughts are coming up in the focus groups, which is the qualitative small group research where you go deep into issues, and coming up in the quantitative research, which is the large number research, right? Where you test all of that messaging, all those ideas in a larger to get a more accurate perception of the spread. So you've got your research. All right, you take your research, you read it, and you go, oh, we need to be saying this and we need to be doing this because this is what the people want. Is it? Or is it just what the people have been told by the people who are actually leading, the people who are actually controlling the agenda? And the people who are actually leading and the people actually controlling the agenda in Australia at the moment, and have been for probably 50 years, are the left and the centre left.
And they've become very proficient at it.
They're very good at it.
You have to admire it. One of the factors that was really big in the federal election here for the Labor Party was Daniel Andrews. Now, anyone who follows me knows that I don't have a lot of time for Daniel Andrews, but I have to admire the way he and his media team operate, because we saw this through the pandemic times here. They took control of the narrative and they mastered it, and they almost intimidated the media into following that narrative.
Oh, they did intimidate the media. They absolutely did intimidate. I've never seen anything as pathetic as the Victorian State Parliamentary Press Gallery of that era, except for one person, maybe one other. But Rachel Baxendale from The Australian was the only one who stood up for things, and she got, not only was she ignored by the other so-called journalists in that Victorian State Parliamentary Press Gallery, she was ridiculed by them simply for doing her job. The ABC had to send somebody down from Sydney to ask the right questions. So pathetic and so captured and so blind were the Victorian State Parliamentary Press Gallery. I was in the Victorian State Parliamentary Press Gallery briefly in the 1980s when I worked at 3AW. I filled in for a little while for our state political reporter when they went away. And back in those days, it was aggressive and assertive, and would never have permitted itself to be captured. But here's the problem. When 3AW's newsroom only has, a dozen or so journalists, and the ABC newsroom has fewer, and then all the commercial news outlets have just a small number of journalists, and Daniel Andrews hires scores of communications people in the Premier's department, where are the jobs? Where does your career lie? Where does your future lie? It doesn't lie in the media. It lies in eventually moving into a public relations cushy government job, possibly in the Premier's department, where your friends have gone, or some people you know are, or where you think you might go one day since you've been a state political reporter. It's probably a good little path for you. The problem with that is that you wind up easily being captured and easily falling into whatever it is that they're feeding you. Problem number two, a weak opposition. If the opposition isn't doing its job and standing up and challenging things, then they're as guilty and culpable as Dan Andrews. And, and I think the third problem is that the pressures on the media, the fact that there's no time, story cycles are moving fast, resources are slim in the media, means that a lot of those reporters are young, inexperienced, poorly led, poorly guided, poorly coached, poorly trained, and are also time poor. So they're just taking the press releases and feeding the information out without any sort of questioning or filtering or anything like that. If you're going to behave like that, that's bad enough. But how dare you? How dare you criticize and go out of your way to criticize the one or two journalists that are actually trying to do their job properly and ask the right and difficult questions?
I suppose the question for you is, what does the Liberal Party and any other party really that's not the Labor Party learn from this? How do they are going to have to work out how to leverage some form of this game if they want to create a narrative. For example, Damien, I work in the newsreading game as a bit of a side business. I don't think it's any stretch to say that the vast majority of the newsreaders I work with lean left. And the challenge sometimes, I think, is to make sure that even when you're presenting news, that you don't bring your political bias into when you're just straight up reporting the news. That's always an ongoing challenge. But it does make it easy for the left side of politics when they're going into press conferences, for example, because they can get that sort of narrative, whatever their messaging is, out to a largely sympathetic audience. What does the Liberal Party learn from this? How do they start building a base, or even can they start building a base where they can start playing this game too? Because if they don't learn these lessons, they're never going to be back in power.
Right. And I don't think they're going to learn these lessons. I'm phenomenally pessimistic about this. I think we're a long way from the current Liberal Party, maybe the National Party, but definitely not the current Liberal Party ever correcting this. And I think we saw that with the appointment of Susan Lee and the very strong, loud voices of the inner city Liberal Party members, or club members, as I like to call them, the wine and cheese society of the Liberal Party, who firmly believe that this is the correct approach and the only approach. So they're not going to change. And they are right insofar as this is the way that you hold seats like, or you win back seats like Kooyong and Ryan in Brisbane and, Bennelong and things in New South Wales. So they are correct and they will stand by that and they will get those seats. They'll just lose everything else. And the question is, who are they going to lose everything else to? Who's going to emerge as the new force? Because it will emerge. It must emerge. There's demand and there will be supply to meet that demand. There's no question. So somebody somewhere along the line in the next 2 to 6 years is going to be coming up with a credible, strong, deep party, or we're going to see a breakaway party from the Liberal Party. Or we're going to see a movement that will take over the Liberal Party from within, although I doubt very much that's going to work, similar to what Alex Antic has done in South Australia. I can't see that model actually playing out anywhere else in the country, unfortunately. So I think we're going to see a split on the centre-right side of Australian politics. Whatever emerges is going to have to be accountable to its members. And if it is accountable to its members, it will emerge. It has to give real power to its members, which a lot of the minor parties have not. So this new party will have to be highly democratic in its structure. It will have to have a situation where leaders are elected by the party membership. There will have to be strong branch structures. It will have to be a grassroots movement. Remember, Donald Trump didn't come out of nowhere. The MAGA movement didn't come out of nowhere. It came out of the Tea Party movement and a conservative groundswell from the grassroots in the United States that started way before Donald Trump was said, okay, this is our guy to be our head or our figurehead on this. Similarly with, the Farage movement in the UK, that's been a long time coming. So I think we will see that emerge. We'll see this new entity emerge. We'll see a big excitement behind it, hopefully. And then, that will be the end of the present day Liberal. The Liberal Party will become a minor party representing those inner city seats. And it'll probably end up just folding in with the Teals or something like that. That's probably the most likely outcome unless the Liberal Party decides to embrace this group that will emerge and we see some real change in the next couple of years. But we're not seeing it yet. We're seeing phenomenal resistance to it at the moment still. And there's a whole lot of very smart people who aren't going to wait around to,
Cory Bernardi probably tried this a few years ago with the Australian Conservatives, and that kind of didn't really take off. But you can see perhaps that's where he was trying to look at going with an organisation such as that.
Things are a bit different now too, I think, Steve. And it's a different mood now. I think you're seeing a lot more of the centre right within the Liberal Party and outside the Liberal Party saying we're sick of the Liberal Party now. We don't think you've you're going to, this was a real last straw existential type election for them. So again, none of this pleases me. I'd rather see a strong, united, centre-right, sensible, good governance force in Australia. But
well, if nothing else, we need a good opposition. We need to have a strong, credible opposition. And right now, particularly now with the way the numbers have stacked up in the lower house of the Australian Parliament, now we don't have a strong opposition. And as you say, with Susan Lee, now, I've interviewed Susan Lee. She's, if I put my aviation journalist hat on, she's a former air traffic controller, so I'll give her props for that. But I don't think she's the answer here. Who is? I don't really know. But we need to have good government, and one of the ways we achieve good government, of course, is if we have a good opposition that holds them well to account. That's going to be a big challenge going forward. But another interesting example, if we look at the way it did flip, and I was really surprised at this, if we look across the Tasman to New Zealand, they've thrown out all of this woke type of far left government with Ardern and her Labor Party, if you like, and now they've gone to a Conservative government. And we see, actually, as we record this, they've just decided that they're going to say goodbye to net zero. So I suppose that says it can be done, given enough will.
Yeah, maybe we take a leaf out of our friends, our neighbours' book. Look, I think what people have to realise and probably don't realise is that we're about to enter, or we are entering, the most left-wing government Australia's had since Whitlam, and maybe ever, this past century. So, because we have got a situation where we've got 94 seats out of 150 in the lower house that are Labor held, so very strong majority and mandate there. And then if you look at the upper house, the Senate, Labor has 28, now 29 seats because of the Green defector, and the Greens have 10. So in total, 39. That's a majority out of 76. So no need at all in the upper house for any negotiation with any independents, crossbench, minor parties that might be on a little bit more on the right. It's purely a Labor Green government that we've got now, and it's Labor left. Labor left. Because the other thing that happened was that because these 94 changed the proportionality of the left faction of the Labor Party's representation. And under Labor Party rules, the cabinet, the ministry, the actual government, the executive government, has to reflect proportionally, pretty much, each faction. So what's actually happening is we've lost two right-wing Labor right ministers. When I say right-wing, I mean Labor right. So we've lost Ed Husic, and then we lost the other person's name, forgotten, from the Victorian right as well. And so the gentleman who ran again at 68 years of age and didn't want to run, but had to run, just lost his wife. And then when he won, the party said, oh, sorry, you can't be a minister anymore. So we'll probably see a by-election in Victoria soon. But anyway, the point is we've got a ministry now that is far more left-wing than it was previously. And we've got this very strong dominance in the lower house as well. And we've got absolute majority with the Greens in the upper house. So we're going to see, it's not a question of whether we should have, unrealized capital gains tax or not, whether that sets a very bad precedent to move in that direction. It's just going to be a question of whether it kicks in at 3 million or 2 million and the Greens get their way.
Oh, my goodness. I said to, I have a very close friend who's a very passionate Labor Party member who's actually a little quite disillusioned. I don't think she'd mind me saying that about the direction the party's taken, particularly over issues like Gaza and all of that sort of thing. And the only thing that I can think to say to her is that the Labor Party that you grew up believing in, the Labor Party of Hawke and of Keating, that's not this Labor Party. It's not. And that might suit some people. And okay, good luck to those people who voted for them. I hope you get what you want. But that's the way I look at it. You can look at a good centre left government, if you like the Hawke government. There was a man who, and I didn't agree with everything that Bob Hawke did either, I suppose, but that's just the nature of politics. But he did have that charisma, that way of being able to bridge gaps between both sides. Whereas these days, it's very, very polar opposite.
Well, he had the charisma, but they also had good management. The good economic management and good management of government, pretty much for a Labor Party. So they could inspire the confidence of most people. Of course, we had some pretty rough economic times during that period, but at least you felt that there were professionals in charge. Not now. I mean, we don't see the professionalism on either side, unfortunately, and that's what we're seeing, the public's disdain with that in the numbers. So, these are the lowest numbers we've seen for the major parties in a long time. 1/3 of Australians are not voting for major parties. So that says something about the problems that we have talent-wise in the parties. These things have to be fixed first. The operational organizational structures have got to be there. The good quality people have got to be there. The talent's got to be there. That's number one, right? Number two, you then have to have values that unite these people. So you have to have a set of beliefs and values that everybody comes behind and believes in and uses as a yardstick to determine all the decisions that they're going to make about policy, strategy, and messaging. And then you've got to have great strategy, right? You've got to have a really good campaign and political strategy in marketing terms. It's not rocket science. It's pretty basic marketing. You've just got to have simple, clear, strategic positions. You take those simple, clear, strategic positions and you develop your policies out of those. And then from the policies, you develop your messaging. And you take your messaging to the market. You have to first get everybody on message within the organization, within all of the candidates. We live in an era, this is the other thing that the Liberal Party has to learn. We live in an era where you can't gag discussion. They always resort to the old 20th century PR style of everybody shut up except 3 people that are approved spokespeople.
Yeah, very
Doesn't work like
frustrating.
that anymore.
Very frustrating.
Conversations are going to occur all over the place, and you can't control the conversations that are happening. You can control the messaging by providing the messaging, by providing the training in message delivery, in media training, in presentation skills, all of those things they could be providing to the party, to all of the candidates, along with some clear messaging. Now, I know because I was involved with one of the campaigns in one seat, and I can tell you there was appalling communication around messaging. There was no clear messaging. There was certainly no inspiring messaging. There was nothing aligned to a central strategy that we could tell. There was nothing that was aligned to a central set of values, and nothing that was aligned to, a good, well-structured organization. So to go backwards on my steps. So nothing was in place appropriately. It was failure at every level, from the organizational structure through the values and beliefs, through the strategy, through the policy that emerges from that strategy, through the messaging. So we can take policy like the working from home thing and analyze, say, well, that was terrible policy. And then we can look at the messaging and say, oh, that wasn't great messaging. And then we can look at Dutton's failure to deliver it appropriately and say, well, that was a great bad spokesperson. But it's all pretty moot if the core problem isn't dealt with first. And the core problem is bad strategy, bad alignment, no alignment to a set of values that's really uniting people. More importantly, Steve, inspiring people.
Yep. And I think that's something they really have to do when you're in opposition, is give people a real reason to vote for you.
Absolutely. It's like marketing a product, right? If you want people to change brands and use your product instead of an existing brand, you have to give them a real reason to change.
Yeah,
people
100%.
will stick with what they know before they're going to leap over to something they don't know. If they can't understand it, they're never going to shift.
Well, so Susan Lee says she wants to meet Australians where they are. One of the places that the Liberal Party could learn that they could do that is to absorb the kinds of media that you and I do, and and come and allow their members, their shadow ministers, to come and talk on platforms such as this. There was a blanket ban on that, with 1 or 2 exceptions. I think maybe someone appeared on Mark Buros's very good podcast. But aside from that, I think Peter Dutton went on his show. But there was no engagement from their side of politics in this so-called new media, which is not really new media anymore. This is the media. And okay, my show is very, very small.
No, but combined, we're the media. There's no question, right? That this is the new media, the media. Now,
and shows like yours have a much bigger following. That's an opportunity or ministers to get out there, and that's where the people are. If you want to meet people, I hope you're listening, Liberal Party. If you want to meet people where they are, it's this kind of media where you can come in and talk more freely, where there isn't that time pressure, where you can have more of a conversation rather than just an interview.
They have no social media, digital media strategy whatsoever that's of any worth or value. So whoever's doing that is just appalling. I didn't receive a single press release during the entire election campaign. So I think our public relations industry in Australia is lagging the public relations industry around the rest of the world. I'd be very happy to come and speak to any PRIA function on that, by the way. If anybody from the PRIA is listening, we are in real trouble as an industry in the public relations industry, and the traditional media is also in trouble, as we've discussed. But I think it really does come back to the point that the current Liberal Party people don't want to hear anything. They don't want to hear the solutions or the change. They're resistant to change. So they're like an organization in crisis. There's a stage called crisis denial where the leadership will just shut down and pretend that there's nothing happening until the organization actually completely fails and implodes. And they're at very real risk of that occurring. And as I say, they will stand there and tell each other they're right until they're blue in the face, because they are right within the bounds of the very narrow bounds that they're setting. But you can't ignore the fact that they're bleeding out the right side. 11.7% went to minor parties on the right. They lost to the Teals on the left side. However, the left side is crowded. The market share is over here. Now, this came up with one of the Liberal Party people in a discussion group I saw, and this person was like, "Oh, but look at the statistics. It shows that we are actually at 45% only, even if we add in that 11.7%, we're still not going to be at 50%. So we have to move this way." What this person is failing to understand in a very serious and problematic way is this is exactly what will occur when you just listen to the research, because you're not moving the needle yourself. You're not leading and moving, and you're not going to pick up that 5%. It doesn't exist there yet. So this is the argument that they're missing. Australia is currently left of centre. The left have controlled and captured all the institutions. They've moved the needle completely to their side. So you have to fight to get back your market share by selling ideas and leading on them. And if you don't do that, you'll never get that extra 5% you need. Meantime, you have to recapture that 11.7 that's bled out this side and try to pick up a little bit more over here as well on top of that, and that'll get you over the 50%. But if you just go out there and listen to Australia and be modern, then all you're doing is allowing the left to win, because they're pulling you this way where there's no market share. They've already got it. So nobody's going to change product. Nobody's going to change. So who's setting the agenda? The left are. What's the Liberal Party doing? It's following in fear, which is what it's been doing. Now, what else does that do? Well, it does two very important things. First of all, it makes you look weak. It makes you look like a flip-flopper. It makes you look not like a strong leader, right? Which is what Dutton's research showed. So we discussed this with pollster Graham Young on the show last week, last Friday's episode of The Other Side, if people want to have a look at it, episode 413, where Graham Young says quite clearly the reason for that shift from Dutton going from minus 19 to minus 43 or whatever it was, the word strong, he does qualitative research, so he's looking at the language people are using in the polling. The word strong was associated with Dutton the whole way through, right? But it went from being people saying he's strong, he's good, he's strong, he's showing his strength, to he's not strong, he's not a strong leader, he's lost his strength. So the word was appearing, so it's a value, it's something people care about, and it's a quality of his brand and his positioning, right? Because you've got to work with what you've got. Don't try and change the guy, right? That's his strength. This is his strength. So you want to promote that. What did they do? They weakened that on him, right? They forced him to come on, maybe just we're worried about losing these inner city seats. So maybe you tone it down a bit. Maybe you say this, maybe you do that. Maybe you get a bit, don't say this, don't do that interview. Don't go on these podcasts. Don't do that. And then what happens is he becomes nothing to nobody. He becomes Mr. Weak, flippy floppy, spineless, and you're finished, right? The left have won already because they've led you into lost. They've led you into territory you can't win in. So we have to stop following. So the worst thing Susan Lee could possibly say is, we're going to listen to Australians, because that's saying I'm going to listen to the centre left and I'm going to follow and lead the party into that hole, to that abyss where there is no market share. In marketing terms, there's no market share to capture there, right? In that way, if you're going to capture that market share, you've got to do some selling and some leading. As Steve Jobs said, you can't market test for the iPhone. Nobody knows what it is yet, right? So nobody's going to tell you, I want an iPhone, because they don't have one. They don't know what an iPhone looks like. So when he launched the iPhone, he didn't listen to market research in that sense. Now, the good news, Steve, is that you can then go and capture the other, what you're losing out the right flank. So you'll get that 11.7% back as well. And by getting that back, and then by moving the needle on this end, then you get your 50+1, right? Which is what you need to win.
Yeah, and I think the other connotation is that they haven't been listening to what people want. Well, perhaps if they stepped, as you say, away from those inner city seats, which are probably lost to them forever, I would say. If you come out into the suburbs where I live, or come out into rural Victoria, we've seen a great demonstration of people power in the rural sector here in Victoria just recently, with a tax change the government's trying to push through here. Maybe if they just listen to some real people out in the suburbs and people outside the inner city, maybe that might just tell them that you don't even really need to be radical about this. Just start talking some sense and some sensible policies. And like you say, be a strong leader, and people will identify with that. And it might not win them the next election, but it might win them the one after. And that's where they need to rebuild from if they want to be credible. The other thing they might want to do is duplicate a couple of Nigel Farages and bring him over here, I think.
Well, mate, I've given you analysis today with my PR marketing professional hat on and my media expert hat on. Let me take that off for a minute and give you the human, right? And the values. I couldn't agree with you more. I think our country's going down the drain. And I think if somebody just stood up and said, hey, guys, these are the values that Australia stands for. This is what we need to redefine that it isn't racist to say that we don't want immigration at a level that's going to destroy our core culture, that we admit that multiculturalism is a failure. It cannot work, because any nation has to have a core, central, dominant culture. You can have immigration, you can have different races, you can have all sorts of wonderful things, but you have to have a unified commitment to a culture, a cultural core. I think we've also got to say that, our roots are in the British Empire. Our roots are in the ethics and values and law and legal systems and institutions that emerged out of the British Empire and the Roman Empire before that, right? This is not, again, it's not racism to say that. It's just the evolution of our culture and where it's come from. And yes, I think even if you're not a Christian, you have to sort of say, well, that came from Christian ethics and Christian thinking as well. So maybe we don't throw that out the window too quickly either. The left have done a great job of making all of those things naughty to talk about, right? They've done a fantastic job.
It's a thing of beauty in a way, in an odd sort of way. It's a thing of beauty.
It's a thing of beauty. You're absolutely right. It's quite phenomenal.
They are so good at it. And the rumoured $700,000 that they paid Daniel Andrews' company to, well, that's money well spent if that's what they did, because it certainly works for them. Damian, we could talk about this and we could pick this election apart, but I think we really have to look forward now. There are many challenges that face Australia in this electoral cycle, and hopefully you and I can get together in coming months and pick apart a few other issues.
Yeah, it does me I get no kick out of analysing all the problems. I got to tell you, I'd like some vision. I'd like somebody to come along and say, look, we're going to move in this direction and we're going to give you this, because I think there's millions of Australians who are absolutely aching for somebody to just take the reins and say, this is the direction that we're going. And unfortunately, sadly, we're not seeing that coming out of the Liberal and National parties at the moment. So
I couldn't agree more.
I hope and pray for something better to emerge.
Damian, it's been great to meet you, and I've really enjoyed this chat. We can find you at The Other Side. You can find that at othersidetv.com.au. I'd highly recommend that our viewers here go over and check out your channel if they haven't already, and I certainly hope we can talk again in the future.
Absolutely, Steve. Anytime. Great to talk to you. Thank you.
Get in touch. Join the conversation. Find us online at clearsignal.com.au.